Welcome, everyone. I'm Trent Luce, sitting at the Malheur Wildlife Refuge just outside of Burns, Oregon. To my right, Amon Bundy. Welcome, Amon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for granting us the opportunity to visit and talk about what's really happening here in Burns, Oregon.
Absolutely.
I don't think it's any secret to anybody. You've been here now how many days?
Well, we've been here for a full week almost, 7 days.
Okay. First of all, I want to know, is there anything that you would like to say or have to say to the citizens of Harney County, Oregon?
Well, I think if I was to reach out to them one is let them know that the reason why we came here is because we saw our neighbors being abused. We saw them in a situation that we could possibly help with, and it becomes our duty as neighbors to do that if we have the ability and the power to do so.
I know that there's some concern around town that you're out here. People can't come and check on their museum. They can't come and check on the wildlife refuge. What have you destroyed since you arrived?
Nothing. In fact, we've done a lot of cleaned up some of the buildings. They were pretty poorly maintained. We've done some improvements on the facility as well, and understand that this is the people's facility and we're going to take care of it.
In fact, in an almost unrelated note, but I heard you talking about building some fence for some neighbors. I mean, that's not exactly the image that people are getting of what's happening here.
Yeah, but that is why we're here. That's what we came for, to help the ranchers get back to ranching, the loggers get back to logging, to help the farmer get back to farming, and anybody else who needs help and a hand. That's why we're here. That's what this is about.
You referenced it at the beginning. You just referenced it again. Exactly why are you here?
To help the people of Harney County.
One thing that concerns me, and I got a feel for it once I came to Burns, because people are in daily, hourly news is talking about the occupation, the armed occupation of the wildlife refuge. The folks in Burns would not know you were here if it were not for the federal police officers, the FBI, that have seized the school and are putting fear in the citizens of Burns, Oregon. I don't understand why people can't grasp that's really the source of turmoil.
Yeah, the interesting thing is everything that they say is going on here is happening downtown Burns. And they've done it to scare the people of Burns, to scare them from accepting and being able to be part of what's happening here. They've taken the downtown Burns, the courthouse and the school, and they've built a big fence around it and boarded it off, and they're staging all their equipment and all of their men there and who knows whatever else right in the middle of downtown. So they're completely occupying and terrorizing the people of that town, yet they're saying out here that we're occupying and terrorizing, and yet we have no fences around us. People come and go. We've had hundreds of people come and go in the last couple days. Community members, we have open conversations, the media comes, and it's a very free, open place here. Yet I don't see very many people coming and going through those gates and doors there. It is fear. They have to understand that fear does not unify. What unifies is the spirit of agency and the spirit of love.
In fact, talking about people coming and going, you indicated that a little later on today it's going to be a pleasant time for yourself.
It is.
Explain that.
Yeah, my family's coming and I haven't seen him in all week. And yesterday was a difficult day because my little boy just turned 1 and I missed his birthday. I had to balance, was it worth going and trying to be there and risk what's going on here, or to let him have his first birthday without his dad. But I felt that it was worth it. Felt that it was, what we're doing here is too important for his future, and too important for the future of really the people of Harney County and across this country, that I needed to stay. And so I'm grateful that they're going to be here. I'm excited to see them. Absolutely.
And point blank, your wife and 6 children are coming here to this place that's armed occupation.
Yeah, they're coming here, and I'm not one bit afraid for them because I've met some of the best people in this world right here at this refuge.
Let's get to the issue that brought you to Oregon, because you ranch in Nevada. You're a federal lands rancher, and I want to spend some time talking about those rights that are being violated. But first, the immediate need, and I've heard you say it since I arrived here several times, is that there are 2 ranchers in federal prison today, unjustly so. Tell me about Dwight and Stephen Hammond, what you saw happen, and what you think needs to happen.
Well, they have, to put it in just a nutshell, a very short understanding is that this refuge right here has been the tool that the U.S. government has used to destroy hundreds of ranches. And the Hammonds are some of the very few that are left. They've held out. They would not sell their ranch to the refuge. And so the refuge, as they've done in many other cases, begins to take up activities against them to try to put them in duress so that they're finally willing to sell. The Hammonds held on really strong. They held against this, but ultimately they got them into their court system because of some fires that really did nobody harm, and only if there was harm done, they only burnt their own grass. They pulled them in and charged them as terrorists under the Anti-Terrorism Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996. And then they threw them in jail, Stephen for 12 months and Dwight for 3 months. And they finally said, hey, they did. I need to back up a little bit. They also fined them $400,000, and they made them
$460,000, I believe, to be exact.
Okay, and they also required that they pay sign a first right of refusal over to the U.S. government, so that once the U.S. government puts them in complete duress, they have to sell it, and the only one they can sell it to is the U.S. government. So anyway, Dwight and Stephen Hammond, they think, well, we're going to just bear down and get through this. They go to prison, they get out, and they get back to their life, back to their families. And what do? They slap them with a resentencing, as they say, and now they're back in prison for the remainder of 5 years.
I've not talked to every attorney in the country. I've talked to as many as I can in the past 30 days about this issue. This is unprecedented. Nobody is aware of any point in time where people who were convicted for a crime, spent their time in prison, as Judge Hogan said on October 22nd, 2012, and then at the end of their sentence, they're resentenced for an additional 5 years. For a total minimum mandatory of 5 years.
Yes.
That's unprecedented. Why did that happen?
Well, first of all, Judge Hogan, the original trial judge, he said that I will not sentence them to the minimum sentence of 5 years because it would be cruel and unusual punishment. So he overrode the minimum sentence that came down through the Terrorist Act. And so then when they got out, the prosecuting attorney, Frank Papagni, he, I guess, decided that the Hammonds hadn't had enough, so he appealed that to the 9th District Court of Appeals, and that's when they did the resentencing. But you have to understand that the federal government, they went after them as terrorists so that they can get this minimum sentence of 5 years. And it's all in an effort to put them in duress. If they have to fight in court and spend up towards to $1 million in their own defense, they already went to prison once and away from their families that long and from the ranch. They have to pay a $400,000 fine in a very short period of time. And now they're going back to prison again.
And a first right of refusal.
And then they had to sign their first right of refusal. You can see that everything is to put this family in such a situation that they finally just give up.
And the one most important component of this, that to me is the most telling, Amon, is the federal government offered to drop all charges if they would simply sign their property over to them. Now, how egregious of a terrorist can they be if they say, just give us your property and we'll drop all charges.
Yeah, see, that proves that it's nothing about terrorism, nothing about criminal crimes, nothing about justice. It's only about the U.S. government getting their land, and that's exactly right, and a great point.
And that's where we're at today. What has led up to that, and what your family's been fighting, what Federal Wayne Hage spent his life fighting, was the erosion of personal property rights of the federal lands ranchers, which basically dates back to 1866, when all federal land ranchers were granted the property rights to use the land and maintain the water. That is no different in my mind than an 1862 Homestead Act, where a piece of paper is signed to somebody that says the government signed a piece of paper and said this is your land to do with what you want. How do you explain, Amon, how do you explain to people who don't own property, who may be business owners in anywhere USA, that if this can happen to a federal lands rancher based upon this violation of a property rights violation, that it can happen to them? Can we put that in a nutshell?
Well, I think my dad's ranch is probably a good example. My forefathers came into the southern Nevada area in 1877, and it was just a few years after Nevada became a state. And they began immediately to ranch on the hills and to use the waters for ranching. Now, kind of give some perspective, this was before Las Vegas even had one tent in it. Las Vegas was non-existent when my family came in. And then what they did there is they began to establish, through prior appropriation and beneficial use, they began to establish a grazing right. And it wasn't until later that the state recognized those rights, and it was in 1890. And the federal government had already recognized them through the act that you just mentioned. But after statehood, things changed a little bit, and the state recognized those rights and tied them to the water, just as you mentioned. And they filed those rights in 1890. And so my dad owns 11 water rights with the state of Nevada, and they are actually deeded. The grazing right is actually deeded to it. So following that same act that you just mentioned. And so here you have the U.S. government that comes along and says, well, we own the real estate, right? We own the ground. And my dad's sitting there and go, well, I have deed and title to the forage, to the grazing. And you might have right next door, right in the same area, you might have a miner who says, well, I own the mineral rights. And then you might have up on the hill a little bit someone who owns some water rights up there. And that's what we have in the West. It's not so much who owns the real estate. It's who owns the rights to use the resources, just like water rights. And so here you have the federal government coming down on my family, trying to take our grazing rights and willing to use force to do it, when we have titled, deeded property with the state of Nevada. So hopefully I explained that, but this is vested private property, vested property rights. My dad can sell it, he can trade it, he can borrow against it, and here the federal government comes in and says, no, we own everything because we supposedly own the real estate, and therefore all of your other rights mean nothing to us.
My estimations say that based on the federal land that is currently in grazing with grazing rights, as you just walked us through, if grazed properly to the proper degree of management, would generate 100 million protein meals each year to feed 320 million Americans. My estimation is that it's generating somewhere around 20% of that, because people have all of a sudden decided that the cow is adverse to a healthy ecosystem. The cow's part of a healthy ecosystem. Susie Hammond found science to prove that. There's science from your home county of Clark County. How do we explain to people that the cow is part of this healthy ecosystem, not out here raping, pillaging, and plundering the earth?
Yeah, well, let me answer that in two different ways. Economically, what does the cow do economically? The cow puts food on the table. And if you have a short supply of any type of food that goes on the table, then every American across this country, and even, frankly, on the continent, pays more for that. So you have a hamburger, or maybe you're in line at McDonald's or whatever else. you have to pay more. You want to feed your family, hamburger helper or whatever it is, you have to pay more, and it's significantly more. If these things would be freed up, you would not each person would not have to pay more to put food on the table. Also, clothing. The cows are used for clothing. The clothing would be less expensive. So the economics would be
122 life-saving pharmaceuticals come from cows as well.
excellent.
Every tire has stearic acid in it from a cow. People don't know those things.
Yeah, and you're very versed on that. Those need to be made available so that the price of these products drop and help the American people. And then second fold is the notion that the cow is bad for the land. First of all, when we came west, there was millions of buffalo that came across, and they were here and performing what the cattle are doing right now. It is necessary. For example, this refuge alone, as you mentioned, Susie Hammond found a study that the Fish and Wildlife Service did. And that study is very interesting because what they found is that the migrating birds that are on their trek north were 14 times more likely to land on private ranches than on the refuge. And they were also, there was 4 times more ducklings and geese hatched on private property, on the private ranches, than they were on the refuge. Proving that the refuge, their no-use policy and removing the cattle from it was actually detrimental to the wildlife. The cattle create a environment with going into the waters. There's like a 6 foot or so buffer that the cattle keep the forage down coming into the waters. That makes it easy for the birds to come in without the prey taking them. Also, they create the environment for to lay their eggs so they can hatch, and they keep the grass down so there's not fire, and also so that the predators do not come and just take them at ease. And so
One
those
thing
are
we've not even addressed, Amon, is the prevalence of fire as grazing AUMs have reduced. It's a direct parallel.
Yeah, so you have the AUMs, which is the cattle count that drops, and you have the fires increase. You also have the expense of the firefighting increase tremendously, and it's paid for by the American taxpayers' dollars. Also, you have the increase in firefighters, and you have the increase of facilities and so on and so forth. So it really doesn't quite make sense. If you increase the cattle count, you decrease all that expense and decrease the fires.
Final thing, I have a calving book in my pocket. Keep track of my cows. What do you have in your pocket?
I have the Constitution of the United States in my pocket.
Because you happen to believe that's still important.
I still believe that it is the supreme law of the land. I believe that it is the rules in which the federal government is required to abide by because the people put those rules on them.
Anything you'd like to share that you've not had the opportunity to do so?
Well, I would like to share that very clearly, if I could, that what restrictions the federal government has been given when it comes to controlling land and resources inside the state. And we find that in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, where the federal government, in order to own lands inside a state, property inside a state, they're required to do 3 things. They're required to get consent from the state legislature. They have to actually go to the state legislature and get their permission. They also are required to purchase it. They can't just come in and bulldoze their way and take it. And then third, they can only use it for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. And so those are some of the rules that people put on the federal government when they want to own land and resources inside the state.
Is that it?
Well, I would like to make it very clear that we are a state here, and Oregon is a state. It is not a territory. And because of that, there's different rules. There's different requirements that they have to follow. And so I think there is a lot I could talk about in the Constitution, and also the tremendous violations that the Hammonds have received that have been direct violations to the Constitution by the federal government.
Amon Bundy giving us a very concise and well-versed, because you've lived it your entire life, of what the issues are and why there's a movement in this country for local control. It's about the resources. The resources are not being utilized properly. The American people deserve better. And fortunately, we have individuals willing to stand up for what they believe in and hold true, like Amon Bundy and all of the supporters right here in Harney County, Oregon. I'm Trent Luce. Thank you, Amon. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.